We just have to hope that whatever happens this coming Thursday when the nation goes to the polls, that woke doesn't win. And whether our next Prime Minister is Sir Keir Starmer or Rishi Sunak, one of these two men has got to spend the next 5 years pushing back on this divisive and frankly sinister movement which is damaging our society. The brilliant historian Niall Ferguson likens the increasingly woke West to the crumbling Soviet Russia after the Second World War. He thinks it could bring down the West altogether. Writing for the excellent Free Press website, he said the following. He wrote, "A bogus ideology that hardly anyone really believes in, but everyone has to parrot unless they want to be labelled dissidents. Sorry, I mean deplorables. Check. A population that no longer regards patriotism, religion, having children or community involvement as important? Check. How about a massive disaster that lays bare the utter incompetence and mendacity that pervades every level of government? For Chernobyl, read COVID. Check." He's absolutely right. As I said all the way back in 2020 on my old talk radio show, COVID was the first woke pandemic. Debate was stifled. Critics of lockdown were called granny killers. The virus coming from a lab was a conspiracy theory, and those who couldn't understand why healthy people were forced to take the jab and those who didn't want to cover their faces with a filthy, worthless rag were far right. Make it make sense. Now, women are the greatest victims of wokery, with their hard-won sex-based rights being eroded by biological males who feel female. It reached its nadir in Scotland when a male double rapist was accommodated in a women's prison. Some governments around the world are looking to make it illegal to misgender someone. In other words, to call a man in a dress a man. That means it would be illegal to say something which is the case. Hopefully that conveys to you the sheer gravity of the situation and why this mind virus must not prevail. So-called critical race theory, a central plank of wokery, is the opposite of Martin Luther King and the dream of a colourblind society. This is a dark and sinister force which freezes out the family, with kids transitioning at school from Johnny to Jane without the permission or knowledge of the child's parents. It tells camp boys and butch tomboy girls that they're trans when they're probably gay. It tells young people that they're trans when they're either depressed, confused, or autistic. This is a toxic political and cultural force, which is akin to a cult or a religion. Don't take my word for it. Here is one of the world's greatest intellectuals, Richard Dawkins, on this very programme, sharing his views about wokery. I don't want to drag you into the culture wars, but is so-called wokeism a religion, given that it seems that followers must adhere to a set of prescribed beliefs?
It's not a religion in the sense that it's supernatural, but it has many of the attributes of a religion in the sense that it's a kind of creed which people sign up to and then follow devotedly and punish heretics who don't believe in it. Heretics like J.K. Rowling and Kathleen Stock, who get pilloried mercilessly and viciously because they don't subscribe to it. So I think in that respect it is like a religion, yes.
Well, that was an interview that broke the internet. Whilst we're on Richard Dawkins, here's what he had to say, this great thinker, this great rationalist, about so-called trans ideology, again, which is at the heart of wokeism. Or attitude to this new idea that you might be born in the wrong body, that a man is a woman.
I think it's pretty well nonsense, and it's become... I mean, there may be one or two individuals who really do have a sort of mental problem with being feeling they're born in the wrong body, but it's become a fashion now, especially among young people. I think that's pernicious. And as for newspapers reporting about, I don't know, a woman raping somebody with her penis, I mean, that is a debauchery of language, and I think it's shocking, and I strongly disapprove of it.
Brilliantly put. This is a force which seeks not only to divide us, but to make us hate ourselves, with the characterisation of British history as shameful, even though we gifted the world parliamentary democracy, the modern market economy, we invested billions in infrastructure in poor countries, established a post-empire community of nations called the Commonwealth, and we ended slavery. But wokery in schools and universities is teaching young people to despise Britain, and that doesn't end well. This movement has no empathy whatsoever. It is merciless, ruthless, tyrannical and unforgiving. The debanking scandal, for example, demonstrates that if you don't sign up to the woke agenda, you won't even be able to have finances, which makes it impossible to live or participate in society. The cost of living, crime, education and the NHS are all critical issues on Thursday. But the culture wars matter too, because they impact people's daily lives and shape what it's like to live in this country. People are sick and tired of not being able to say what they really think. They're sick and tired of being censored, of being a bad person for standing up for common sense, for science, and for what they believe, such as strong borders, family values, or protecting the innocence of kids. They don't want chicks with dicks in women's changing rooms. They're sick of trigger warnings on TV comedy shows or being forced into a meeting with HR for getting someone's pronouns wrong, even though it's bloody obvious that there's no such thing as gender neutral. Whoever prevails on Thursday, the 4th of July, it's critical that woke doesn't win. Your reaction, gbnews.com/your say. I'll get to your messages shortly. But first, tonight's top pundits. Journalist and communications advisor Linda Jubilee. I've also got with me Conservative MP, former Conservative MP, farmer as well, Neil Parish, and political consultant and commentator Emma Burnell. Emma, lovely to see you. How are things?
Fantastic, Mark. How are you?
I'm very, very well indeed. And listen, whoever becomes our next Prime Minister, I wish them well. And I hope they're going to be very successful for this country. But whoever it is, whether it's Keir Starmer, whether it's Sir Ed Davey, whether it is Rishi Sunak, our next Prime Minister has got to defeat woke.
So, on some of the things that you raised, as you know, I agree with you, despite the fact that I am very aware that your audience considered me exceptionally woke.
Well, no, my audience is a broad church.
Not according to my Twitter feed.
Well, Mark Dolan tonight, we treasure the idea that this is the home of diverse opinion, and it's so boring when people sit and agree with each other. So what don't you agree with?
So, I mean, I think, for example, there are interesting academic concepts that people have taken out of universities and have tried to broaden in such ways that they become meaningless. So critical race theory is something that's actually a very useful academic concept when studied up in the higher levels of academia. It's really interesting. There's some very, very important work being done there.
We should think about all of these ideas.
We should think about these ideas. But it's mostly not being what's taught in schools, either in America or here.
Well, white privilege.
So there's a great deal of difference.
White privilege is critical race theory, and that says you're racist if you're white.
No, it says that society is structured in such a way that white people tend, not completely, and there is a class element that I think is massively missing to a lot of this. But
critical race theory believes in segregation, so black-only theatre performances.
Critical race theory...
safe spaces for people of colour. It's nonsense.
Mark, please. Critical race theory is a very, very small piece of academic work about how some people look through a different lens of racism. It usually happens, not even at graduate level, but at postgraduate level. There are some ideas that are discussed within that, not even wholly agreed within that set of academics, that filter down, and mostly they filter down in this negative way. Oh, you believe in critical race theory as a concept, therefore you think we're going to go to these far extremes. And actually, most of the time in school, what's being taught is exactly the Martin Luther King point that you were making.
Sure.
So when it comes to a lot, what my problem is with this whole culture war concept, this whole woke wars concept, right?
And the anti-woke.
And the anti-woke thing, is that it's not very well defined. So you want us to say, don't be woke, but you and Neil And Linda and myself might all have very different concepts of what falls into the bucket of woke.
Ask, yeah.
All right, Linda.
So let me get this absolutely straight in my head. When my kids first asked me about this years ago, I did a little test to see whether I was woke or not. And they were very pleased because I came out as woke. And I was quite pleased to be getting along with the kids, you know. But the problem was it had a particular definition at the time. It meant awake to racism, awake to misogyny.
And in that sense, we're all woke.
And we would all like to be that way.
Yeah.
But what happens is when you get a theory like that, and I appreciate some of these things are academic theories to start with, they're all hijacked by the commercial world, the corporate world, the political world, etc. And inevitably, at that point, I think they do become debased. And then it's much, much harder to deal with. If we could go back to the original meaning of woke, it's quite a valuable thing to study.
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. The awakeness of woke is absolutely right.
We're not living in a strand of the Khmer Rouge, are we?
And I can briefly, because the clock's against us. But you know, this definitely isn't left versus right, because it was Tony Blair who advised Keir Starmer about a year ago to ditch the woke stuff, because the public, are a bit tired of cancel culture, trigger warnings at the cinema. Books being rewritten.
I think the problem is this the big concept of woke, and then there are so many strands within it. So, for example, a increasingly radical feminist such as myself find ourselves maybe at some points in agreement on some areas with social conservatives. Not completely, because a radical feminist believes that gender is a social construct and we should all defy those norms, but that a man is a man and a woman is a woman, and sex is what matters. Social conservatives believe that sex is real, and that on that we have agreement, but that women have a particular role and men have a particular role. And if we were to, for example, completely move away from any of the trans debate tomorrow, you would then find social conservatives and radical feminists way back in their very separate corners.
Yeah.
OK. All right. Well, look, Neil, where do we start with this? The bottom line is that we're being taught at universities, certainly, and in some schools, and whenever you go to a National Trust property, that Britain's got a shameful history, even though we gifted the world, representative democracy. White people have got to be terribly guilty for the entirety of history, even though I personally wasn't that involved in slavery. So what do you think about this?
Yeah, I mean, I think we need to be a tolerant society, but I think we've sort of taken it all too far. I also think, we are a great country. We've made mistakes over the years.
You'll get cancelled for lines like that.
Yeah, but we are. This country is still a great country. It's still got great people in it. And I think the trouble is with all that's going on at the moment is we're sort of gradually eating ourselves up and destroying ourselves.
Less tolerant.
Yeah, we're becoming less tolerant because the more you push a particular agenda like the trans agenda, it will then put off women in
it's both sides being equally intolerant.
But isn't it the woke who are intolerant and behind cancel culture?
Yes, they are, and I think you'll find this is what's making other people then more intolerant, because the more you actually emphasise something, then the more everybody else says, I can't stand all this.
So the anti-woke become like the woke.
Absolutely.
Only a couple of years ago lost my 96-year-old mother. I mean, she didn't have a clue what was going on, as you can imagine, because she was a great lady, but, she had no idea what on earth people were talking about. She was for all this sexuality, she didn't have a clue what it was all about.
God bless Mrs.
And I think it was probably the best thing to me, actually.
I'm pleased to hear that. She pushed you out.